I'm just looking around for a suitable spot to set up where hopefully I'll be able to focus on something a bit different. It is very green, so there's a lot of green like last time. I'm being a bit indecisive about where I'm gonna set up for today. I was gonna focus on the trees, but I think that might be a bit difficult. I am on a hill, so when I face that way, my chair falls down. It's not that I have to have a chair. I don't have a tripod for my easel, so I have to be able to hold it to paint. That's why I need a chair, and if it's on a slope, that's going to be quite difficult. So I was going to do the trees. Slope might make it difficult, so I might do over this direction. I quite like the birch there and how the light's hitting it. That might be the feature. There's some interesting shadows over there, so yeah, I think I'm going to focus that way. It's quite early, but you can still hear crickets. They're already awake in there. Right, I'm not sure if the camera can see this or not. So I'm going to do a rough outline in burnt sienna, and then I'm going to check and make sure it's set up correctly so I don't waste time. I do feel like I'm going to fall over in this chair. I feel like I'm very precariously balanced, but I'm going to start painting anyway. And we're going to hope for the best. Right, let's stop talking. Let's start painting. Okay, I also didn't turn the canvas, and I said I was going to do that and I didn't, so going well so far. Going very well. Blocking out in burnt sienna seemed to work pretty well last time, so I decided to begin with the same approach. Oh, look at that buzzard. Can you see the buzzard? I tried to make the birch a bit of a focal point, knowing that the scenery was very green, very much like last time, and I don't know why I keep doing this to myself, but I knew I wanted that to be the feature of today's landscape. I didn't want to get too overly complicated with things, but I wanted to get an idea of where some of the shadows would be and the highlights, so it's a really simple blocking, and then I got started on with the sky. Last time I kind of blocked in the colours, and this time I thought I would just try and do the whole thing in one pass. So as soon as the burnt sienna was down, I thought whatever I put down now is going to be the end result. The blue is a little bit too blue for my liking. I think it probably could have done with being knocked back a little bit. I was happy with the clouds, but I do think that intense blue gives it more of a cartoon appearance, and that's not really the look I'm going for. I'm getting distracted by grasshoppers. Look at that! How cute! Okay, if I see any more wildlife now, you're just gonna have to take my word for it, because it takes too long to set the camera up. As a side note, yes, I know I have burnt sienna on my face. I did not know that at the time, and I spoke to several people during this plein air painting, and no one mentioned it to me, but I realised once I got home that I was absolutely covered in paint. I'm using a slightly larger brush than I did in last week's painting. I'm trying to learn a little bit as I go along, and I know that I definitely used a really tiny brush last time. It's not huge, but it did help to keep some of the marks a little bit looser. I was working from back to front again, trying to put in the distant information, the trees and the hedge line, before moving a little bit further forward. I tried to keep the trees in the distance a little bit more blue in tone, and then get a little more red and yellow in the greens as I got further forward. I think that could probably do with a bit more work, and I could push things a little bit further. I was being quite literal with this painting, but I think as I go forward I'll use a bit more artistic license and hopefully be able to create more depth. The section that I'm painting right now is a shadowed area of the valley there, and it's very close to an area where there's a pretty special flower on the site, which is autumn lady's tresses. It's got a lovely spiral to it, and they're so tiny it's really difficult to spot them in this meadow. There's a lot of eyebright here, which is so pretty, but it's really difficult to spot the lady's tresses amongst all of this. Getting distracted by wildlife and the lovely surroundings is definitely something that I think is going to become a bit of a habit for me in these plein air trips. Sometimes it's difficult to see the colour, especially with the sun being so bright on the canvas. It's definitely a lot brighter and more saturated than I thought it was, so that's probably something I'm going to have to figure out for future plein air trips so that I can maybe tone that down a little bit. I think ultimately it results in the painting looking a little bit more on the cartoon side rather than realistic, and I'm definitely going for realism here. There's all kinds of wildlife calling in the background, which is so lovely to hear, and a hare ran past me at one point. Unfortunately, I only have my phone recording this, so I don't have another camera set up recording the surroundings. So for those really speedy wildlife moments, then unfortunately you're just going to have to take my word from it. I will try and improve the setup so you can see it in future. On looking back at this, I've decided that in a future attempt I'd like to be a bit more detailed. I know you can be fairly loose when it comes to plein air landscapes. With the lighting changing so much, you've kind of got to get things down quickly and make sure you've recorded where the shadows are and the highlights. Otherwise, you're just going to be chasing the light. So I do think they're going to be looser than a studio painting. However, I think I may be using that as an excuse to be a little bit lazy, and I could definitely tighten up some of the painting. Another thing that's got me speeding up is the fact that I'm painting outside and there's sometimes an audience. I'm trying to choose quieter locations where there's not going to be that many people wandering around, but there's inevitably going to be some people who stop and look at the painting. Because I'm new at this and I still feel a bit self-conscious, I definitely feel myself rushing when I get towards the end stages of the painting just to get it done so I can be packed up and come home to the safety of the studio rather than being outdoors where people might see what I've painted. I used my palette knife to create some of the branches in the birch tree. That's what it is. It's a birch tree. Just to change up the brush marks a little bit and get some thinner marks than I was able to get with the brush. The tree turned out a little bit larger than I anticipated. The branches at the top are kind of where I thought they would be, but the trunk is a little bit too wide. I think it doesn't look as neat and tidy as it did in real life. I also think because this was the focal point, it could have done with a little bit more detail in it. Maybe because I'm painting on a smaller scale, it was difficult to add that in, but I do think it required a little bit of something extra just to push it forward and really make it obvious that that was the feature. I finished off the foreground by adding in flowers. I didn't draw them in any detail at all. I just kind of dotted on the appropriate colours. There's lots of devil's bit scabious in there and some knapweed, which added a nice splash of purple and pink in the foreground just to break things up a little bit. I do think it's quite difficult to break up a foreground like this, especially just starting out. There's a lot going on and a lot of detail, a lot of grass, a lot of flowers, and I'm sitting at a weird perspective. It's like I'm almost in the meadow because I'm sitting down in it. The grass is quite tall, so it's hard to convey that, and that's something that I'd like to work on so I can improve that in future paintings. So although I've mentioned that there were lots of challenges with this painting, I still want to point out that I had a really lovely time doing this. It's so nice just being able to sit out in amongst wildlife and listen to buzzards overhead, have a hare run by you, be surrounded by wildflowers, and just sit and paint in a really relaxing atmosphere. It's so lovely, and hopefully I'm going to get lots more opportunity to do this and my paintings will improve as a result. found that landscape quite challenging. I think doing two very green landscapes in a row has been a bit difficult because there's not a lot to focus on, so it is very green, and I felt my birch tree looked a bit cartoon-like. But all of it's good practice, and it's only the second time doing plein air painting, and I'm finding I'm really enjoying being out in this lovely environment full of green, full of wildlife. So it's worth doing anyway, and I'm going to share them either way, however they turn out. But we'll try and find a different location for next week's painting. So here is the finished painting. So we've got the birch tree just here, the distant hills, some of the shadow over there, and then we've got the flowers in the foreground. I like the shadow over here, and I like this yellow highlight in the grass and some of the clouds, so I think they're okay. There are definitely things I would change with this, and I'm always better at picking out the things that I don't like in a painting. So here it kind of looks like the tree is on fire because of how the cloud is in the background, so I'd probably alter the composition a little bit if I were going to do it again. There's two main things that I really want to take from this, and the first is that it might be a nice idea to try a landscape that's a bit different. The two that I've done recently are really similar, and there's just a lot of greenery in them and not a lot that breaks that up. The second thing that I would do differently is try and be a little bit more considered. I think being outdoors and painting in the landscape, I do tend to rush things a little bit because I want to get it done quickly before the light changes, and I think sometimes that has led me to be a bit lazy with the paint application. So if I was going to do it again, I just want to be a bit more deliberate with the painting. But all in all, good second practice.